course, this is Chingford, your constituency. Do you feel very much that you are the same sort of person, the type of person that lives here? Do they feel that about you? Do you think that's where your success comes from in being constantly re-elected?
I think so, but after all, basically it's because it is a conservative area. Not in the terms that people often caricature it, you know, as big houses and wealthy people. They're small houses and modestly off people. Very conservative in my sort of way. A long way from the Grousemoor.
What is your sort of way, though?
Well, I think basically preaching that people are more masters of their own fate than we're sometimes led to believe, that even if you're not born well off or with any great advantages, you can make your way. This isn't a classless society, but you can really pick the class that you want to belong to.
You can do that by, you know, well, should I say, not at the expense of anybody else, though, because surely that's quite important.
Well, sometimes it's the expense of the people who are in the so-called upper classes who are on their way down.
Look at this, heavens.
Well, here we are.
We are atop Pole Hill. Now,
we're atop of Pole Hill. We're just about on the Greenwich meridian.
all right.
So somewhere down there to the south is Greenwich itself. And there's Chingford. There's typical northeast London.
Thatcher's children, in a way. This is the new generation. Are they going to vote for you continually, do you think?
Well, they've voted for me, more and more of them, for the past, let me think, nearly 20 years that I've represented these people. And from a nasty low point, when my majority was just over 4,000 in 1974, thank you, Ted Heath, it's now up to 18,000. Same people, same voters, same thoughts. Enormously greater prosperity here, of course, although equally a lot of very, very real problems. Problems which I don't think you have so much in Scotland.
Like what, second car to buy? Some people would see you as very much a hated figure in politics. Some of the things you've been described as, from Chingford skinhead, this semi-trained, house-trained polecat, aren't exactly descriptions of a popular man. Now, how do you come to terms with that? Was that something you set out to do purposely, be so unpopular?
Not really, and I'm unpopular with a few people. Mr. Foote, for example, and I know why I was unpopular with him, because I gave him hell in the House of Commons. But I'm not unpopular with most people in general. You know, I often find when I'm out that the bus will stop along the curb beside me and the driver will push down the window, and it usually starts as, "Hello, Norm, how are you doing?" I find most people extremely friendly.
Well, I wouldn't try that in Scotland, actually. If I were you, I would stay in the car. You said that your politics were of self-protection, which astonished me. What on earth do you mean by self-protection?
Well,
protection from
one thing was that I felt that the politics of the country were going badly wrong. I was not happy with the Macmillan government in particular. I felt we were heading along a series of wrong roads. And I started to complain about it and say something's got to be done about it. And as usual, I then got saddled with the perfect reply, which was, well, why don't you do something about it? And that's really how I got into politics.
But you feel then that you personally were threatened and that you went into politics to protect yourself and, as you say in your book, your own interests?
Well, and those of many other people like me. Kids like myself, working class backgrounds who'd begun to make their way, who loved their country and what it looked like, what we felt it stood for, and felt that it was being eroded, that as I was wandering around the world in those days, I found we were becoming an object of contempt or sympathy, rather than of any form of regard by people in other countries. And that began to worry me.
You don't think that's happened now as well?
No, I don't think so. I think on the whole, that as you go around, people now have a considerable respect for us. And at the moment, with some of the controversies within the European community, where some of our European partners haven't yet quite understood what we're saying, that's not unusual, they're a bit upset.
you think if you had realised when you were a young man and going into politics and using that very combative style of politics that it was eventually going to end up, your life in politics affecting your family in such a tragic way, you would have continued?
I don't think one can ever answer those questions. An old American friend of mine always answers that sort of question by saying, if my aunt had got whiskers, she'd be my uncle, but she ain't and she isn't. You know, you can't backtrack in that sort of way. You can't backtrack. And in the same way, had I known some of the problems that I got into, what I was going to get into flying, I nearly lost my life flying. Would I have done it? Well, who can say?
But it's different when it affects other people. I mean,
yes.
When you were flying, obviously, you're only putting yourself at risk.
But there's always an alternative, isn't it? Would I be told what would happen to me if I didn't go down the path which led my wife and I to be very nearly killed at Brighton? What were the alternatives? In these questions, we're never told what the alternative is. If the alternative was that I should live a happy life and have lots of kids and grandchildren and perhaps a yacht or two and a grand estate up in Scotland, which is the only decent part of the world to live in, you tell me.
Yes, and you're losing it fast.
I'd probably take that alternative.
Well, the problem with that, though, is that surely especially when you're young, it's very easy to be aggressive and shout and make your case, but as soon as something happens as tragic and as major as that, does it start to fill you with insecurity and fear that you now have, or do you just feel exactly the same?
Well, I don't feel particularly insecure or afraid.
Really?
And I don't think I've ever been terribly aggressive. I've been sort of fairly firmly defensive. And, you know, I've stood my ground. But a lot of people have been very offensive towards me in politics, and I tend always to play the game by the other guy's rules.
The point about insecurity is everybody has insecurity, and I find it astonishing you to sit there and say you have none, especially when you're the object of hatred enough for your life to be in danger.
No, it wasn't particularly directed against me, remember. These are just crazy terrorists. And they would have as soon murdered Jim Callaghan and his cabinet as Margaret Thatcher and her cabinet. They, in the past, have murdered politicians in the Irish Republic. They're just murderers. It's, you know, that's one of the hazards of life.
But don't you have any personal insecurities, even when it comes to success and failure? Are you so supremely confident that you have
no, of course not.
No chinks in your armour at all?
Of course not. Plenty of them, and everybody has, but that's different to being insecure. Sometimes, you know, you face things where you don't know what to do, how to handle a particular situation, or you may feel you're out of your depth in it. And then one does feel insecure. But an awful lot of insecurity, I think, comes from people who are trying to put on an act and pretend that they know something they don't, or that they are something that they're not.
Your book is an astonishing catalogue of what just seems to be a catalogue of successes. I mean, some critics might say it's rather vain in parts. Don't you have any history of failure, either, you know, personal or political, or did you just feel you didn't want to catalogue it?
Sure, some things I've failed at doing. I never became really wealthy, for example, and that's a great inconvenience as you get older, because wealth makes life very much easier for you. So there's a failure there. And as the book reminds you, I spent 20 years of my life as a professional pilot, 17 years of them in an airline. And I never actually became the captain of the aircraft. You know, well, what a rotten shame, you know. I nearly made it, and in the end I didn't.
Would you have liked to have been Prime Minister, the same as never been captain in the airline? Would you have liked to have been Prime Minister? Is that still an option?
Well, certainly if somebody came along in recent years and said to me, you know, it's your turn, Norman, I would have said, oh, great, you know, I'll have a go at that. With a good deal of trepidation, I might say, from having seen what's actually involved in being the Prime Minister, in being top dog of the pack. That's quite difficult. But these days, well, I guess now I reckon that I probably missed the chance anyway.
And I think we should probably continue through this forest, which is probably owned by Terry Wogan. What do you think?
Well, remember, this is where Boadicea was supposed to have, or should it be Boadicea, was supposed to have had her camp before she went down and did up London and the Romans.
A woman after your own heart.
Well, yes. A real toughie.
Walk with you. Talk with you.
Do you ever feel a kind of, I don't know, maybe chip on your shoulder about class? Because you're certainly not the traditional sort of conservative, public school, Oxbridge, moneyed family. They make you feel small at any time?
No, no.
You sure?
Yeah, and one or two have tried. Curiously, mostly on the left rather than the right of the party.
How can you be sure they don't do it behind your back? Because they're a curious lot. They have a kind of private club.
Well, if they do it behind my back and I don't notice, I couldn't know about it.
I mean, there's certainly been a lot of, shall we say, landed gentry who've been none too pleased about the modern style of conservatism, the Thatcherism, which they see as a very kind of...
Well, they feel under threat by it.
And do you know why?
Well,
Are you
because
against them?
No, I'm not against them, but I'm not particularly in favour of them. Why should I be, you know? I don't hold any brief for someone whose only contribution is to have been born in the right bed.
One of the major problems with your style of politics is it seems to have opened up a gulf, not even between the upper and the lower classes, but between the working classes. And in a sense, I feel you've created that, and I find it a little bit unpalatable. No sense of collective responsibility, no sense of, you know, love for their fellow human being. It's almost echoing your politics, a politics of self-protection. Do you feel that?
No, I don't think that's right. And as I said earlier, I think to suggest that my politics are just those of self-protection is to put it rather narrowly and not quite fairly. But I think a lot of these people are people who have done well over the last 10 years. They have acquired more material things, and they enjoy those material things. I think you're right that in many cases there's a lack of social responsibility, and that's something which has changed over a long period of time. I think social responsibility is not very well taught these days.
But how can you enjoy the fruits of your labour if it happens to be at the expense of other parts of society? Because in a sense that seems to be what's happening. I mean, it's like earning money and being very well off and being a crap cameraman. No, do you see what I mean? How can you possibly enjoy the fruits of your labour if other people in society aren't? I mean, surely the basis of socialism is that you have a happy life, but never at the expense of anybody else, and everybody else must be able and given the opportunity to have that life as well.
Socialism doesn't work. I mean, that's now accepted across
well,
the world.
Not accepted by me or anyone who's gone or any of the socialists in the country.
But it never has worked anywhere. That's why Mr. Gorbachev and the other socialist leaders are moving away from it. The myth, the misunderstanding, I say so under your assumption, is that if I do well, it must be at somebody else's expense. Now, I don't take that view at all.
It was a bit of a surprise to emerge from Epping Forest right into this rather old-fashioned romantic airfield, but this is obviously where you did your national service and learned to fly with a 604 squadron. Are you romantic about those days? Does this make you feel romantic coming back?
Yes, I think it does, really. That was where our squadron had its hangar. That was our hangar there. And so our aircraft were out here and on that concrete over there. And we just used to roar off on-grade air exercises and things like that. But that's the thing, you see. That's a sort of dog's body meteor.
And this is the one, or are they similar ones, when you had a crash and nearly died?
That's right. Yes, that's right.
I mean, how do you feel looking at it now?
Oh, fond of it. I mean, if that was airworthy, I'd feel sort of terribly itchy towards it, you know, I really would.
Would you?
Yes,
You'd be nipping up into the cockpit and taking off?
Yes, I still have that feeling on a day like today, not if it was rotten weather, but on a day like today to be there in that. Terrific.
Is it important to you leading rather than following?
Yes, I like to be making the decisions where we're going.
But then you must be terribly sure that you're making the right ones then. You'd never have doubts that you're perhaps making the wrong ones.
You have to have doubts, but you're a natural for leading the elite, aren't you? You wouldn't be doing the job you are.
I lead nobody.
Oh, come on, you're trying to lead me into all sorts of questions and things like that. You've got an idea of where you want to take these conversations.
Not at all, not in the slightest. It's very different from me asking you a few questions that, not just me, but I would assume people at home want to know, from you making decisions that affect their lives and my life.
Yes,
You've affected my life astonishingly.
You're not content to be one of the pack.
Oh, very much so I am.
Are you really?
Yes, incredibly. Are you not?
No, I want to be out there somewhere near the front of the pack all the time.
Why?
Guess it's the way you're made.
You weren't particularly close to your family when you were growing up in Ponders End, so you say in your book anyway. But you're obviously very close to the family that you formed. In a sense, did you miss out on a community feeling that's very often formed at a very early age with a close-knit family and an extended family? Did you ever feel a bit bitter about that you didn't have those lessons and compassion and closeness?
No, I found my extended family was pretty agreeable, you know, aunts, uncles, grandparents, things like that. So I wasn't sort of sitting there, you know, bereft of any love, so I didn't suffer in that manner. Anyway, I had friends, school friends, and things of that kind, and I received a lot of kindness in life, and even when I was evacuated as a kid, you know, people were terribly kind to us. So I wasn't short of kindness.
But why was the rift between your family and you? Was it your fault, or
I just don't think we communicated with each other very much.
So in that case, then, would you say that love was a very important part of your life?
I suppose I'm a bit too tight up to talk about love as such. You know, I always get sort of slightly embarrassed about it.
Do you, even in the wider sense? Because, I mean, one can have love for all manner of things.
Oh, yes, and at times, you know, I must say, I even sort of say of people, some of the people I've known in life, like Keith Joseph, for example, who I worked for some time as a junior minister, that it's... I loved Keith Joseph, you know, in the proper broad sense, I hasten to understand.
I'm phoning the sun now.
But no, I find I'm not very good at expressing emotionalism.
Is it a difficulty with expressing it, or is it, as you just mentioned there, saying you feel tight about it and you've never had an opportunity to, I don't know, expand those feelings and discuss them?
I don't know. I've got my family, you know, but it tends to be within my family rather than to be splashed around the place, so to speak.
But you were very...
I've never worn my heart on my sleeve.
No. Do you think that's a good thing, keeping yourself to yourself, or do you think, in a sense, that in order to be a whole human being and a very good politician, you have to maybe loosen up a bit and let people know what you're feeling and thinking and dreaming of?
Well, I think it depends on you, what your particular style is. I think for some people it's best to do it that way. For me, it wasn't. And I'm always, therefore, slightly suspicious of people who do it the other way.
Why do you suspect that they're being duplicitous and they don't mean it?
Well, that's always in my mind, because I couldn't do it that way. I think, you know, well, if you're doing it that way, you can't quite be honest, can you? I mean, it's an entirely subjective and unfair judgment. But, all right, if we're being honest, I confess to it.
So what's the significance of ending the walk at this particular churchyard?
Well, it's a place where lots of people have ended their walks, I guess, and it's much associated with North Weald. Here you see these two, Lieutenant Bowles and Lieutenant Jordan, died Royal Air Force in July 1918 and June 1918. These are all post-war flying accident deaths. And, for example, we've got here old friends of mine, Humph Lewis and Andy Lang. They died together in 1954 in a collision, both members of my squadron.
How does that make you feel, being...
Well, sad, because, you know, I brought their coffins here, and we buried them here together that day. And very sad to have thought of them and what they would have been doing now had they lived.
Had you died in the meteor, would you have been buried here?
Oh no, that was up in Cambridgeshire, and I guess I would have been buried somewhere up there, or I don't know what my parents would have wanted to do. But their parents, their families wanted them buried here in this place because there were so many who died here, and I guess it's company.
Are you religious at all? Do you believe in God?
I'm not sure.
You've had plenty of time to think about it now in your late 50s. Have you not come to any conclusion?
I think I get less sure of whether or not. I've never been sure.
And would you like to be able to believe?
I think it would have some convenience and some comfort, although equally some worries, I think. But I just don't know. And
what would the worries be? That you'd been wicked?
well, yes, yes, indeed. I don't like some of the tone of the judge not lest she be judged. I've been busy judging most of my life, I guess.
I know, it's the burning fire for you.
That's right.
But your views of God, are you... I don't know, do you feel the compassionate imagination, again, if I can say that, for people who are going to die frustrated, feeling that they haven't achieved what they can do best in life, quite simply because the way Britain is just now, there are a great many people who are never going to achieve their full potential, a bit like Gray's elegy in a churchyard, if you like. Do you feel responsible for them, that you haven't actually been able to help them? And indeed, some people might argue, have actually brought that about.
Oh, I don't think politicians are as powerful as that. I think one of the terrible myths, and terribly dangerous myths, is that politicians are that powerful. We actually aren't that powerful. Now, I think that we have, in the last 10 years in the government, actually helped a lot of people to achieve a great deal that they wouldn't otherwise have done. Others have been frustrated, and that's always been true.
How powerful do you feel as a human being, never mind a politician? Do you feel you have great inward strength, great personal power?
No, not really.
No?
Not really. I just go my own sort of way, you know.
You said in your memoirs that you didn't see yourself even as a political intellectual. You left
No,
that to
that's
Thatcher and Keith Joseph. Are you ever worried at all that then perhaps they used you in some way as a kind of aggressive henchman while they get on with the thinking, and you might be the victim of it now?
You have to have some teams. I'm not the victim of anything. I'm a pretty happy life, really. There are some tragedies, some sadnesses in my life, but that's true of most people. And why should I feel any worse about it than many other people who've suffered tragedies and sadnesses?